Hello, everybody. Preston Poulter here with Lords of Iron. Just got back from doing Rooster Teeth. It was always very nice to go down to Austin and visit all you wonderful Austonians. It's certainly close enough to Dallas that it's not a long drive, and that I really appreciate. So, I'm building up here to launch the campaign for Palace of the Golden Princess issue 3. By the way, link in the description. Why don't you go sign up while you're at it? You like this content? Give us a like, subscribe even. But while I was down there and talking with people, and I've been talking about Palace for like 2 years now, it seems. And we've been doing the comic books and publishing the modules. And by the way, the modules are about to be finalized and available on Drive-Thru RPG. Just got to order off the proofs and read through them. A lot of editing has gone into it, way more than I originally expected, but I think you're going to be happy with the product. So it's going to be available for 5e and Old School Essentials, and then eventually Pathfinder, but I'm not around to actually doing that customization yet, but that'll be forthcoming. I've been kind of immersed in the world of Palace, and I think a lot about the original source material. At this point, I think I've spent more time in it than the original writer Gene Wells did for Palace of the Silver Princess back when she wrote it back in 1981. And I've certainly talked with a whole bunch of people about it. So I wanted to take a minute and really give my thoughts for what originally drew me to this project, and also what I see in you, the audience, who comes and patronizes it, because I talk at these conventions, and at this point, I've got a number of stories. If somebody walks up to me, they don't know what I'm going to talk about. White Lily, the story of the two deadliest female fighter pilots who ever lived, or Guinevere and the Divinity Factory. As I like to say, it's like Harry Potter, but slutty. Or Palace of the Golden Princess, and look, a fair number of you will be like, screw that World War II story. Tell me more about, face it, bondage chick. There's, going back to the original 1981, there's a fair amount of, well, as they put it, S&M in Palace of the Silver Princess. We not only had the illusion of the Decapus, but going back to the description of Galuvia, this is a ruthless place filled with terror. The ruler of the chaotic nightmare is Lady Dehannis. She rules this barony with a firm and unforgiving hand. To gain supreme rulership of this tiny barony, she killed her husband, a prime example of the type of laws her ladyship favors is one forbidding males, except those in her service, from being on the streets after sunset, unless accompanied by a female who is age 15 or older. This law meets little resistance, as everyone fears her baronial guards. Though Dehannis' warriors are primarily male, her commanders are all females. Tough, chaotic women who instill fear by a mere gaze, and who fear little save Dehannis and the elite male fighters who serve as her personal bodyguards and paramours. So that was Galuvia, which was the original little hamlet where you started, and that was the town that was next to the dungeon in Palace of the Silver Princess, and yeah, it's femdom AF. What I notice when I'm talking about this is, like, some people, like, I've talked to some people and some women who are like, no, I don't want none of that. That's not interesting to me. Like, they're done. But a lot of people are very intrigued. Just as a marketer, like, the more progressive you are on the political spectrum, like, if I'm spotting like a pride flag or some kind of pin like that, or something that lets me know, like, you're on the gender spectrum, you've been studying gender theory, I'm going to talk about Palace, and I'm going to expect that you're going to like it, because usually most people I talk to who are of that political affiliation will have a positive response to, let's face it, all the man bashing that we're talking about here in this kinky female supremacist kind of setting. But even the more traditional, and like, look, I've done gun shows, a number of gun shows here in Dallas. Just like, what else was I doing for the weekend? I go out and sell my comic books at a gun show. There's still a fair number of men who are there to buy guns. Red-blooded Americans will be like, well, that sounds pretty good. So part of why I chose this as a project is that it's has a fairly broad appeal. For that matter, when I published this for the Paizo crowd, who very progressive leaning, I'm expecting them to kind of like it. They may not like me, but I'm expecting them to like this. Now, the original TSR crew, and I've heard from a couple of them. They certainly sound off, and I appreciate their input and filling me in on tidbits, a little behind the scenes of what was going on there with Gene Wells and Gary Gygax and all that. Um, that's great, but in terms of who has the most experience talking about these elements of this kind of female dominated aspect of role playing games and the barony of, well, in my version, Alluvia. I've come to the OSR party maybe a bit late, but I've picked this one module and I think I've become rather an expert on it. I mean, I've talked to certainly some of the original TSR people who were there at the time. They've given me their insights, but I've certainly talked to a lot of you out there about what do you like about it? What makes you buy it? What makes you not want to buy it? What makes you want to go someplace else? And I've kind of seen what people react to, and I've also had a chance to really discuss and really analyze the elements therein. So, looking at what I'm going to start referring to now as my work, because no longer we're talking about the Gene Wells work, we're talking about my interpretation, which certainly absolutely is an homage and influenced by the original Gene Wells world of Gluvia. It is not a nice place. And I present that. The queen is evil. She is corrupt. She has absolutely no qualms about sacrificing life, particularly male life, but as we see in issue 1 of Palace, Queen Arica believes that you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and if that means a few women have to die or serve out of their lives as sex slaves in order for her to get her way, she's perfectly happy to make that sacrifice. A lot of people describe the work as feminist, and I guess that's fair, although, as I've said, a lot of times when you use the term feminist, amongst the crowd of people who would march under that label, there's a fair number of people who are very uncomfortable with the idea of a woman being sexualized or marketing a woman's sexual features. They're like, that's not feminist. And I certainly do that in promoting Palace. And for that matter, let's face it, the original Gene Wells work certainly didn't shy away from that either. So whether that's feminist or sex positive feminism, I'll leave that up to you in order to kind of sauce out all the labels. But when I talk about the work, I use the term female dominant rather than feminist because that is more descriptive. Also, it's somewhat of an erotic category. And so we kind of understand in this category, women will tend to be sexualized a bit more than under the umbrella of feminist. Now, why did I choose this project? Well, lately, at the time, I was certainly had already been outed on the internet as a kinkster by people who had been going through all the receipts in the social media, particularly of, say, some of the relationships I'd been in where the topic of women in authority was a topic. So for me, it was a personal thing. Also, I mean, at some point, you just got to kind of lean in when people are out there like, hey, he's a sex freak. Might as well go, why, yes, I am. And here, let me tell you about my latest comic book and adventure series. But what I find interesting is right now, there's kind of somewhat of a reevaluation, I guess, of what is a good life to live in modern society, particularly for women. I mean, for men, our roles haven't changed too much in that we're going to go and we're going to work hard. Used to be out in the field, now it's on the job and hopefully earn a bunch of money and come back and support our families if we have a family. But there's been a big effort to also get women into the workforce. Is that good? Is that bad? I'm not sure. I mean, some women like Candace Bushnell, who wrote Sex in the City, is like, you know what, I kind of wish I had invested more time and energy in having a family. And maybe there's something to be said for the traditional life and the traditional values. But regardless of whether we want to call it a good thing or a bad thing, women have certainly been given a lot of power in Western society. Here in the United States, there are more female college graduates than there are male college graduates, which is translating to women having more earning power. And now, if we're talking about a relationship between a man and a woman, if the woman is out earning the man, well, the topic of who's in charge and who's making the decisions becomes more of a relevant question. And quite frankly, I think this work kind of speaks to that. It speaks to also an organization of what happens when you have a structure where every single power position is maintained by a woman. The original idea, I think, was that women would just be getting along handsomely, but there was that case of the woman who hired a bunch of other women to start her company and then later went like, oh, boy, there's a bunch of fighting and drama and whatnot. And I remember, and I think there is something to be said for the presence of men in organizations and their ability to make decisions and wield power. And maybe there is something to this whole idea that the sexes are different for a reason. I don't know. I'm just doing my best to look at society, take the themes I see, and put them in this work. And I find that it speaks to a lot of you. And there is uncomfortably a fair amount of misandry out there. Well, like when I'm talking with people and like I'm just going down the description of just, the original Galuvia, the queen killed her husband, assumed the throne, instituted this men can't go out after dark unless escorted by women. They're totally second class citizens. There are a lot of people out there like, yes. Like there's certainly this kind of burning resentment towards members of my sex. I don't know that that's really earned or fair, but nevertheless it's there. And it again is something that we can at least explore in art. Now, here in issue 3, this is probably the raciest issue I'm going to be putting out. A friend of mine asked, how degenerate is this one? To which I replied, my most degenerate work yet. We're really exploring the idea of institutional power there, favoring and bolstering the female sex while absolutely emasculating the male sex, as we see in this cover, as well as interior splash page, where this kind of putting men in the pillory and humiliating them is just part of ordinary society there in Alluvia. And let's face it, that's not too far away from Gene Wells' original 1981 description of what was going on in the barony of Galuvia. But having just shown this image to a number of people, what can I say? People, they're shy about it, but they like it. It speaks to them. I think we can maybe admit on a logical level that just swapping out who's doing the oppressor from a Marxist point of view is not exactly justice. The idea that the women are the ones doing the oppressing doesn't make it right, but it certainly speaks to a lot of people in modern society for whatever reason. So I'm doing my best to try and get the conversation going because, look, at the end of the day, we all need to get along. Different political persuasions, men and women, we all need to kind of come together and work out our differences, or at least agree to disagree, or come to some better understanding of the other person's position. And I hope that my work is able to fulfill the role that art typically does, which is to foster a conversation about all this. Anyway, this is my perspective on the original 1981 Palace of the Silver Princess, as well as my original source material that I drew inspiration from. I certainly hope you enjoy it. I hope you will sign up and support my campaign. I've invested a bunch of resources in bringing the very best artistic talent to realize this vision. This has been Preston Poulter with Lords of Iron. Thanking you all so very much for your support. Take care, everyone.